This is going to be terrible.
Who was Chattius Maximus? Chattius Maximus.
I've been wondering this for a while. It's been on my mind for a couple of months. When I learned about the DTL tonight, I thought, why not make it a reality? Who was the biggest Chad in ancient history?
Shut up.
Well, a lot of you will be familiar with this gentleman behind me, Ernest. She's the Giga Chad by our Gen Z culture. The Chad can be most appropriately conceptualized as an archetype, as Jung would say. It is a judge and an ideal upon which everything else is compared and contrasted to. And it's not just any odd archetype, it's an archetype of divine masculinity. An archetype of a virtuous man, a man who is a monstrous beast and has the capacity to manifest any untold numbers of evils, but instead the controlling of the beast is a very common mythological tale, as you will see in many of the studies. And this is exactly the message that Chad is predicated on. A monstrous tiger, a wild beast, a man who is a very hierarchical position, has a real sense of aggression and has the ability to manifest any amount of absolute doom, but chooses voluntarily under his own control to subjugate his wild nature and instead use it as a force of good. Therefore, the Chad is the man of virtue, not the man of slaughter. A lot of you will be familiar with Aristotle's golden mean, where you are not deficient in virtue and you also do not have an excess of a virtue. Someone who is courageous rather than a coward or rash. Someone who has ambition, not greed, nor not. Likewise, something to be said about Plato's ideal scholar. A man who is just an athlete is too crude, too primal, but the man who is just a scholar, too effeminate, too soft. The ideal citizen is a man of thought and a man of action. But there's something else to be said for the Chad, because man does not live by bread alone. How many people know about this book or have read it? So this book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, was a book made by a bunch of Google engineers and Harvard scientists where they indexed over 1 billion pornographic searches on the internet and then rank ordered them by gender. With the men, it's exactly what you would expect. It's extraordinarily visually oriented, and it's basically whatever they can get their meaty paws on. But with women, it's a little different. In fact, it's extraordinarily different. They search out literary representations of fantasy. In this book, there's a couple archetypes you can be: billionaire, werewolf, vampire, surgeon, knight. Basically, it is an allegory for a man who has a real sense of aggression, an alpha among alphas, and kind of has a real rough, jagged nature. But there's one thing that's extremely important to note. As rough as they may be, they're able to manifest muted undertones of compassion and kindness throughout their coldness. And it is the job of the heroine in this story to confront the beast, tame the beast, and turn it into a force for good. A lot of you are probably thinking this story sounds quite familiar by now. Most certainly it does. This movie depicts what I am teaching you right now perfectly, and as far as we can tell, this is the fundamental female hero myth. So today we'll be ranking our Chads in the order of a tier list. Couple of rules for admission. No one after the Mona Lisa, and while there is no shortage of badass women throughout history, they kind of deserve their own thing, to be honest, and we'll be just focusing on men today. Who's this gentleman?
Genghis
Khan.
Genghis Khan?
Jenga, sorry. When I went around school and asked a couple of people, who do you think the biggest Chad was, this guy was easily the #1 pick. And this had me quite perplexed, because there's absolutely nothing Chad about trying to genocide the human race. There's absolutely nothing Chad about having tyrannical impulses to conquer your enemies. Wiped out 10% of our fellow brethren and sisters, major violation of cardinal virtue. I think you guys will agree with me. Major violation of greed, way too much pride, way too much insensibility, way too much impulsiveness, absolute major violation of virtue. Right here we have depicted the average world conqueror, where you have a brainlet who is plugging a power board into himself under the illusion that he has infinite power. So I propose that we knock out the D tier straight away and that we instead replace it with the brainlet tier. And sorry, Jengus, there you go, buddy. Who's this guy?
Julius Kaiser.
Julius. Second most recommended Chad that people were telling on campus. Also one I was quite confused about. First of all, the gentleman couldn't keep his bloody phallus away from Cleopatra, numerous times ditching the boys to try and go for his own impulsive lust. And likewise, he wishes he could be Alexander the Great. He absolutely sibs for Alexander the Great. He's responsible
As he
for
should.
the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, at least indirectly. He absolutely illegally straight up slaughtered the Gauls and brutally murdered about 1 million of them, about another 1 million saved. He installed himself as a dictator of life, and of course he played a very significant role in the finishing death blow of the Roman Republic. I don't know what needs to be said. Genocidal dictators are not Chads. So maybe he's not quite as bad as Genghis because he kind of came in with a clear head and kind of turned the villain by the end of it. So we'll give him a nice C tier. Who's this guy? Marcus Aurelius, an absolutely outstanding man. Woohoo! Who knows what this book is?
Yes.
In many ways, Marcus Aurelius is the Oprah for men, and this book is absolutely a well-accepted. Marcus Aurelius' meditations is quite indifferent of astrology for men. Likewise, Marcus was an incredibly cherished and loved ruler. He was Plato's perfect embodiment of the philosopher king. He was considered last of the 5 great Roman emperors. He's a funny story as well. Being a typical Stoic, in his younger teenage years, he went to sleep on the floor. And his parents, namely his mum, said, "What are you doing? Stop that nonsense right now." So he did. But the day that he became emperor again, he went right back to sleeping on the floor. Literally based AF. So Marcus Aurelius, easily outstanding S tier. Who's this guy? Cincinnatus. Indeed. Cincinnatus is a bit of a funny character. He was elected dictator of the Roman Republic as an emergency act during a time of war. There was neighbouring hostile tribes that were trying to exterminate the Republic, and he successfully led Rome into battle and finished the job. He resigned 2 weeks after being elected, after he had won the war, resigned to be a farmer, refused to elaborate, and that was it. He was also George Washington's role model to not run the 3rd term for president. This is the absolute embodiment of an A tier. It's not outstanding, but this is a real solid, got the job done, got out, went back to his normal life. Absolute solid A job. Now, there's also something to be said for our Stone Age brothers. We live radically different lifestyles from our Stone Age brothers, as well as having significantly different dietary choices. And some of the people of the past may surprise you. So, who wants to guess what race that these hunter-gatherers are? Ring any bells?
Native American.
Native Americans. These are 2 leaders of an Osage tribe. Black Dog here is on the left and Tali is here on the right, and they may not look too impressive, but when you realise the fact that this guy was 7 feet and this guy was 6'6", 150 kilos and 130 kilos, they start to become a little bit more impressive. Look at this dude's legs. He probably kicks over buffalo for a living, and speaking of buffalo, these guys' diet is buffalo with a side of buffalo. Likewise, who wants to guess who these people are?
Aboriginals.
Aboriginals, absolutely. I don't know about you guys, but holy shit, this dude on the left here would easily win a natty physique competition today. Absolutely no problem. Look at this dude in the middle. He looks like he's probably in his mid-70s. He's absolutely jacked as shit. Exactly. So I don't know about you guys. I'm sure there's been many admirable acts performed by the Aboriginals. Unfortunately, I can't tell any of you today, so let's just give them a solid A tier, eh? All right. Akhenaten. Am I the only one who sees this? Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, I see it.
Seriously, I fathomed, like, my brain cannot compute the difference between these images. You know, like, look at this dude's maxilla. He's like lower mandible. He's absolutely insane. Now, I have an interesting theory about Akhenaten, eh? Because in the field of Egyptology, people didn't know Akhenaten until kind of recently-ish. And the reason why is because Akhenaten was wildly unpopular with the priests because he installed monotheism in the society, big no-no in ancient Egypt. So the priests made an extremely deliberate attempt pretty successfully to wipe out any trace of him. Now, I personally think they did so because they were a bunch of soy boy beta cucks and they had and this guy was actually so sexy that these guys had to remove any single record of them or they might just commit suicide. So I don't know about you guys, but Akhenaten, we don't know too much about him, but I know one thing is certain.
He's a chap.
Absolute solid S tier. Rock. Rock?
S tier.
Who knows what this rock is?
Rock.
Yeah. You might be thinking rock, so what's a blank rock? This isn't any old rock. This is the rock of Byron. Ring any bells?
Yeah.
Oh. There.
Yeah.
So you can see the inscription on this rock a little bit more clearly. I don't know if any of you can read ancient Greek, but the inscription says this: Phybon, son of Fola, has lifted me above his head with one hand. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. So, who cares? It's a rock. He lifted above his head. Big deal.
How big is it?
Who wants to guess how much this rock weighs?
A ton. 120 pounds.
Oh.
I don't know.
Now, unfortunately, we have no idea what Byron looked like, but of course we can only guess. So this is the best answer that I can find. Once again, a solid A tier. Who's this guy?
Jesus.
So, a couple of fun facts about Jesus that you guys may or may not know. There is a small group of scholars, primarily ones that decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls, that think that Christianity was originally a psychedelic and fertility cult. And even more interesting than that, some scholars strongly argue that the origins of the word Christ can be, the etymology can be translated back into mushroom covered in the semen of the Lord. If anyone knows how psilocybin works, not so silly now. Of course, Jesus forgave us for all of our sins, as well as performing many other miracle acts, walked on water, healed a paralytic, rose from the dead, only hated by incels, converted water to wine. Jesus is an absolutely solid Chad, and to me, nothing short of an S tier. Who's this guy?
Alexander!
Kind of okay.
I had a couple qualms of Alexander. There's something to be said for Alexander, hey? He finally led Greeks against the Persians, finally to conquer them, and there's something to be said about that. But I think you'll find that Alexander, after his conquering of Persia, may have overreached his stay a little bit into certain areas. And I think you'll find that he may have overreached his stay. He very, very likely had very close political rivals and even friends assassinated. He had terrible alcohol problems. In one text, he killed one of his best friends at a raging alcohol session.
Was Cletus one of his best friends?
Maybe not so quite bad, so let's put this guy in a B tier and then we can call him Dave. Who's this guy?
Leonidas.
Spot on.
My boy.
There's much to be said about Leonidas.
Thank you.
This man led the Spartans at the infamous Battle of Monopoly. And when the Persians offered to spare the Spartans' life, if they only were to drop their weapons, he replied with, "Come and take them." The Spartans nobly, willingly, consciously sacrificed their life to hold off the Persians so that the rest of the Greek troops could maybe just live to see another day.
S2.
Absolute virtue.
S2.
He was regarded as a diplomat, a virtuous character, and famous amongst all of Greece for many people. And he's the only Spartan leader to get a statue, and finally he also made the gully cry.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Leonidas, absolute S tier. This is guy. Socrates. Socrates, so you guys know who I'm talking about, is the philosopher who said, "I know that I know nothing." And Socrates is a pretty interesting guy. He played an absolute critical role in the instantiation of Western thought. In addition to that as well, the oracle at Delphi said to Socrates that he was the wisest man in Athens. And he attributed to him being the wisest man in Athens that it was because he listened to his daemon. Daemon meaning divine inner voice that we all have and possess. And that he actually listened to it. And that's what made him different from other people. Now, a really interesting story about Socrates, which a lot of you people know, is that later in his life in Athens, the aristocrats were getting pretty corrupt, and they weren't so happy about old mate over here going over to the young'uns and teaching them about his doctrines. So the Greeks said to him, "Go, or we'll execute you."
Drink poison.
Socrates was soon to leave. But upon leaving, Socrates' daemon told him not to go, to stay. And of course he did something that only Socrates would do, and he said that he would rather die knowing that it was knowing what he was meant to do than to live and knowing that it's not what he was meant to do. So he stayed and got executed. Absolute based legend, nothing short of an S tier. Maybe you know, yeah, okay, Ryan.
The Lord Viking of Stamford Bridge.
Viking of Stamford Bridge, go to see it, Ryan. This guy here single-handedly held up an entire English army on a single-lane bridge for quite some time while his Viking brothers could escape. He was said to have thrown down over 40 English soldiers on this single-lane bridge, only to be defeated by a pikeman who went under the bridge and just about the poor guy. So this guy here, I reckon, is an absolute solid A tier. Now, as a lot of you guys will know, Julius Caesar was an absolute simp for Alexander the Great. But what some of you might not know is that Alexander the Great was a simp for someone else.
Yes.
Who was that person? No. Diogenes.
Woo!
Where do you start with Diogenes? There's so many stories to be told about him. He's the original primitivist hippie. He's said to have only owned one possession, a small wooden bowl, and upon witnessing a child use his hands to drink out of a fountain one day, he quickly dispensed of the bowl. He burnt Plato so hard with his featherless chicken comment, which I'm sure plenty of you know, but we still know about it today.
Behold a man!
Exactly.
Woo!
Behold a man refuses to elaborate and leaves. He absolutely destroyed Alexander the Great on multiple occasions. I'll tell you the funniest one, at least the one I thought was funniest. Alexander really liked Diogenes, and Alexander went to Diogenes one time in great praise and admiration and said, if I could be any man in Athens, I would be Diogenes. To which Diogenes said, if I could be any man in Athens, I would be Diogenes. However, there's an even better story. One time, Alexander approaches Diogenes when he is sifting through a pile of human remains. Diogenes then says to Alexander the Great, I cannot tell the difference between these slaves' bones and your father's bones. Very hard burn. It's actually saying something pretty profound if you look deep enough though. Someone called him a dog on the street, so he pissed at him, and the guy got really confused and he said, you called me a dog, so that was really cool. He probably got intentionally and willingly kidnapped by pirates, like go on a bit of an adventure. Some of you might know about that. And upon his death, and it's funny, some people, probably not true, but legend says that Diogenes simply didn't want to exist anymore, so he just held his breath and died. But he wrote in his will that he just wants to be put back into nature, and animals can feast on him, and whatever little he took is returned. Diogenes, I recommend that we absolutely eliminate the S tier, put in the Diogenes tier, and Diogenes is the absolute king of that. But then I thought to myself, maybe this whole thing's a little silly. The chat. All of these actions that we see here, whether it be making a funny comment about someone's bones, being the physical embodiment of the sex god, leading an army into a successful battle, being jacked with shit, all of these actions aspire to the condition of Chad. But they aren't exactly the Chad. What is the Chad? I thought about this for a while, and I have some meditations which I would like to share with you guys because I think I might just know who the Chad is. Maybe the real Chads after all are those whose names are not known and actions not recognised. A nameless medieval knight. Maybe a guy who jumped in front of a school shooter so his classmates could live. Maybe a gentleman in Ukraine who jumped on a bomb so his mates could thrive. And they didn't do it because it made them happy, or because it was fun, or easy, or exciting, but because it was the right thing to do. Maybe the real Chad is the friends and family we made along the way. The people we share the good news with, the people we share the bad news with, the ones that we love, the ones that we cherish, the ones that make mortality worth it. Or maybe the real Chad is the part of us all who loves us not for who we are, but for who we could be, and calls us forward to be our best selves at every single moment. The part of us that wants to provide a well-watered garden for our children. The part of us that seeks peace, not battle. Many of us here in this room will have the incredible privilege of being Macquarie history students, years to come studying history, some of us our entire lives. And upon reflection of the past, we are reminded of one thing. We truly stand on the shoulders of giants, do we not, upon careful reflection of some of the noble actions that some people have done. And we cannot, how can I put this? we can also not help but be reminded of one thing. Doesn't matter what your skin colour is, dog. Doesn't matter what your religion is. Doesn't matter what's between your legs. Doesn't matter which of the millions of ways in which you claim to be oppressed. Each and every single one of you within this room is a divine, sovereign individual and has the capacity within their heart to set the world straight. And not only that, but in a final concluding point based on the presentation that I provided to you today, we are also reminded of one thing, that it is absolutely irrefutable, starkly self-evident beyond a reasonable shred of doubt, that we too, one day, can be great.
Thank you.